We actually just don't know what the impact of recommender systems on our political system has been. We don't have the data. It's trapped inside these big tech companies who have strong incentives to not analyze what exactly is the impact that their algorithms have. There's a lot of concern about addiction to recommender system. There's a lot of concern about political polarization. Google can probably introduce me to a good friend or a co-founder or my future life partner or anything like that. They have the data. They're not using it that way. And that just seems like a colossal civilizational level failure. I'm sure there's a video on YouTube right now that if I watched, I would feel incredibly inspired. They're instead optimizing for getting a few more cents of advertising revenue.
And the better that video does, the more it will be perceived by the algorithm is causing an immediate drop-off.
Yeah, exactly.
Today we're speaking with Ivan Vendrov. He's a former AI researcher at Google and Anthropic and currently works at Midjourney. But we mainly know him from a post he wrote in 2019 on aligning recommender systems as a cause area. A lot has changed in AI since then, and that has implications for recommender systems. So we wanted to kind of revisit this topic with him. Welcome, Ivan.
Thanks, Ray. Good to be here.
We're also joined by Sentinel co-founder and forecaster Nuno Sempere.
Hi.
And Sentinel forecaster Vidur Kapoor.
Hi, nice to be here.
So, Ivan, first of all, what is a recommender system and why do we care about how they behave?
So I like to think of a recommender system as a prosthetic for your attention. The internet is very big and there's a lot of content on it and you need machine help to figure out what to pay attention to. So let's take the YouTube recommender system, which is probably still the most important, most used one. YouTube has billions of videos that it could be showing you. And there's no way any human could possibly watch all the videos and decide which ones are best for you. So we need machine help, and a recommender system basically takes millions or billions of possible items, in this case videos, and filters it down to a small set, perhaps 5, perhaps 1, that we expect the user, in this case you, will like. And typically that's done by training a machine learning model to predict observable user behaviors. So we'll train a model to predict, if we were to show you this video, what is the probability that you would, 1, click on it, 2, watch it, how long you would watch it for on average, perhaps even whether you would click through any ads that we show you, things like that. And then on your question of why this is important, I think the billions of hours of human time were allocated by recommender systems today. And that's kind of crazy.
What were the issues that you saw back then, issues that have already come to pass? And then what's novel? What might we need to be worried about for the future of recommender systems?
Yeah, so I wrote this post in 2019, and there's a lot of concern about addiction to recommender systems. There's a lot of concern about political polarization, how recommender systems are creating echo chambers, amplifying potentially radical extremist positions, stuff like that. To be honest, the really sad thing is we still don't know if that's true. We actually just don't know what the impact of recommender systems on our political system has been. People talk about we're in a more polarized phase, and we're it's harder for people to hear each other. People are more polarized in echo chambers. I have not actually seen compelling quantitative evidence of this. There has, in fact, been some slight evidence that YouTube in particular tends to show people opposing points of view more than they would otherwise get, because usually people would subscribe to Breitbart or The New Yorker or whatever else, and just get one political opinion, one set of political opinions. But YouTube will sometimes show you something entertaining from the other side. So I think the evidence base is still mixed. A big part of the problem is we don't have the data. The data is trapped inside these big tech companies who have strong incentives to not analyze what exactly is the impact that their algorithms have, because that would lead to legal liability and stuff like that. And so, yeah, we're kind of in this weird epistemic position where it's these systems are incredibly powerful. Clearly, they're allocating tons of it would be amazing if they weren't causing all sorts of problems and also all sorts of good things, given the amount of time and the amount of influence they have on the world. But we actually just don't have a great map of what they're doing.
what about addictiveness? Like, have these algorithms become way more powerful since 2019?
I think again we don't have great data on this. Anecdotally, it definitely seems like short form video in particular is kind of the biggest increase in addictiveness. And you
Yeah.
can see this if you just like give a child YouTube shorts. Don't recommend actually doing this, but just like they will just be hypnotized by the screen for a very long time. And I at least personally have experienced this of just like falling into a TikTok or YouTube shorts, that rabbit hole. And it really feels like a very different level of addictiveness where I'm like 3 hours later, I'm just like, wait, what happened to my brain? Like, why was I watching this? I wasn't enjoying this exactly. So I think there's some qualitative evidence, but maybe one of my concerns with addictiveness is it feels like people have phases or of their life in which they're just like they need something to distract themselves, and maybe if they don't do YouTube shorts, they'll like do something worse, or they'll, I don't know, just watch TV in a zombified state for like 7 hours a day. So it's not clear to me kind of what the counterfactual level, what the increase in level of addiction is. But certainly we've gotten very, very good at creating addictive digital experiences since then.
Yeah, I hadn't appreciated just how unclear it is what the impact of these things are until you explained this, especially this last consideration of, well, what else might they be doing using that time? Like, I have strong intuitive aversions to what a lot of recommender systems are doing, and I'm comfortable kind of acting to curtail them based on those intuitions in my life. But yeah, it is possible that we're maybe scapegoating them for too much or something. Like it's kind of hard to remain open here for me at least.
Yeah. And on our side, we've noticed some anecdotal evidence of the sort. People seem much more glued to their phones. And I hear anecdotes about people being semi-addicted to YouTube and spending hours each day, or just people becoming more addicted to Twitter. But again, this isn't scientific, so we're just seeing somewhat anecdotal warning signs. Or with babies. Yeah, well, we do have the data that one of the biggest YouTube channels is this Cocomelon, which is the channel that hypnotizes babies by...
One of the things that kicked off my interest in this again was seeing a tweet by Andrej Karpathy where he talked about how now that video and audio generation is unlocked, you can directly optimize for that. And to date, these short form video platforms have been relying on human content generation and then algorithmic curation. But now we can have algorithmic generation and curation kind of end to end, optimize even the generation side. What do you think about what do you think about this development, the impact that it might have?
I think the best analogy we have to this is kind of the difference between Twitter or the internet broadly and language models, right? It's just like we have been at a place for a long time where you can find a community that produces human text that's like exactly tailored to your interest. But it turns out with language models, we can get even more hyper-personalized. Like a language model can like really understand what you're going through today and have all this like have this very specific information about you and can give you exactly kind of the sentence you need to feel good in the moment. Hence the kind of worries about LLM companions replacing your real relationships, or even like LLM psychosis, kind of encouraging people to go into like weird rabbit holes by amplifying what they believe. It definitely seems to me that there is a like really, really addictive consumer experience that will become possible, where it's like a hyper-personalized feed of content. It's weird just thinking about like what kind of going back to basic human needs. It probably is not going to look like a TikTok feed of a bunch of different people talking to you with their like face close to the screen. It's probably going to be like a relationship. You're probably going to have a relationship with like one, maybe a few people, because that's what people find compelling, is like to build a relationship and to feel deeply understood. I'm not sure, I guess. I imagine, or maybe it's like at different points of the day, or depending on your emotional needs, you might be shown a like crazy AI generated feed that like satisfies, that keeps you kind of hypnotized at the screen. And other times you might have a like AI girlfriend or AI companion or whatever that you like develop this really close relationship with. And maybe you're on video with them so that they can read your micro expressions, and they're on video with you so that you can read theirs. And it creates this like really intense full bandwidth experience.
I want to spend some time laying out the qualitative considerations that would let someone kind of forecast the trajectory and impact of recommender systems, them getting more powerful over the coming years. There's this first order story one could tell, which is, okay, look back 10 years, people are spending more time on them, just extrapolate that line out. Ultimately, everyone becomes a zombie, but that's obviously too simplistic. There's going to be other considerations at play, feedback loops, discontinuities, incentives, etc. So what do you guys think are important types of considerations or dynamics that one would need to track in order to forecast and understand how this thing is going to play out?
So I suppose one thing you could consider is just, is there going to be any like large scale backlash to this kind of stuff? You know, in Australia, we've seen that they're trying to like ban social media for the under 16s. We might be pretty skeptical about whether that will actually work, but you know, will that spread elsewhere? So that's like one consideration I'd have. Yeah, and then there's the question of like, is there going to be like, even if there's not like top-down regulation, is there going to be some sort of culture shift like against this, especially as, you know, it might become even more optimized. So I think those are the things I'd consider.
We've kind of seen mixed evidence of that so far. Like we've seen some backlash and reaction to the power of these recommender systems already. With like digital well-being tools, companies seem to feel that they need to offer these to some extent, and I use them, but at the same time, a lot of people don't use them, and they may be kind of a fig leaf or something that absolves the companies of some responsibility now that it's, you know, in the user's choice. So yeah, what do you think so far about where we've fallen on the kind of backlash to acceptance spectrum?
Yeah, I feel like there has been a backlash, but it's mostly confined to like elite media outlets, and I don't think it's really materially affected how people use them. Digital well-being tools, yeah, I used to work on them. No one uses them. I mean, it's like it's great for like internet, for like hobbyists.
Do you have any numbers, like percentage of people that use them?
I don't off the top of my head. I would be amazed if it was more than 10%. And I suspect it's more like 1%. But I don't know. Some of the new Apple iPhone features maybe it's like, I would guess maybe 10%. 10% is reasonable. It feels like if like in worlds where we get really serious regulation, I think probably children and teens are kind of the wedge that makes that possible. Because I think, at least in the American political context, it doesn't seem like we have much tolerance for like regulating things more broadly. But if you can tell a story where this is hurting children, then that's legislators get very interested, and it seems like much more likely for like I think a big part of there is going to be a law passed, a moratorium on AI legislation in the 50 states in Congress, which is I thought crazy law, and it got stopped not for like the standard libertarian considerations that I would expect, but basically because they were like, no, states need the ability to regulate AI in case it hurts children, and that was the argument used, and like 99 of 100 senators voted to remove that from the bill. So I'm like, anything that has to do with like protecting children has incredible political momentum. So that's probably how it would happen.
What percentage of people it's affecting? Like, what percentage of people are like really addicted to this, or like what percentage of human hours is currently being sucked there? And you know, how should we think about this? So, are like 1 to 2% of people really addicted? Is this more like 15% casually addicted? How should we expect this to change?
Yeah, I think in surveys, if you ask people like, are you addicted to your phone? I think like a third of people say yes. But I think that might mean something as simple as, I would like to use my phone less, or I feel bad about using my phone sometimes. It's not clear that meets any kind of like reasonable threshold of addiction. It does feel kind of like smartphones have kind of saturated the available time. Like there's not, it's kind of like the famous Netflix CEO quote, right? Of like, our main competitor is sleep. Um, it's like there isn't really a lot of other hours biologically in the day of most people to take at this point. And it's mostly like a war. At this point, it's mostly a war like between the recommender systems for your attention. They've already eaten like all available time, roughly. I don't know. I guess people could like, as AI automates away jobs, people could be spending more of their work time scrolling Twitter. I don't know.
I actually haven't thought about the time being bounded by jobs and sleep. But you could tell a story where the population is just working and sleeping and eating enough to spend the other 4 hours on recommended systems. I don't think we're quite there yet.
We're not quite there yet, but like we're like more than half of the way there or something. Maybe not quite recommender system. Maybe not fully recommender systems. But I think a lot of people are in that phase. Are in that state. I'm not quite sure if like the median person is in that state yet, but it's pretty close, I think. But I mean, the argument is like, well, that's been the case since like the 80s, and but it was TV instead of recommender systems. And like our recommender system is really that much worse.
Yeah, I guess I've been quite surprised by how quickly like broadband use has just increased, like even in the West. Like if you look back, say 2 decades ago or like 1.5 decades ago, it wasn't that common, but now it's like skyrocketed. So I guess like we've probably reached saturation in the West, but I guess globally there's maybe still some juice left to squeeze, basically.
Globally, definitely a lot of juice. And certainly when I was at Google, like a big focus of the company was like the next billion users, which meant mostly India. And like, yeah, there are people who just like don't have that much internet. Don't spend as much time online. And that's kind of that was the priority of the company, because that's where the marginal user would come from.
Okay, that seems telling. Instead of the best marginal dollar coming from increasing time use by Americans, because Americans are very valuable customers, high lifetime value. If the focus is more on other markets, then yeah, I think that lends some evidence that like even Google is seeing some saturation effects in the US at least.
That seems right. I mean, now they're obviously fighting for their life in a different way, but yeah.
So actually, yeah, speaking of the people that are building this, what about the incentives of the product managers, engineers, etc.? I think the public has a kind of caricature that they've got a dashboard with one big number in the middle, and it is how much time people are spending on these things. I'm wondering, is that true? Is that, basically true? Or are the metrics more holistic, nuanced, such that, we wouldn't even expect them to be, pushing as hard as we imagine against this kind of watch time metric?
It's definitely more nuanced than that. I think it depends on the product also. Like my experiences inside Google, kind of rumors have it that like Facebook is, for example, Meta is a little bit more like it is a little bit more like that, or it's just like, yeah, engagement at all cost. I wrote an essay called The Tyranny of the Marginal User about kind of what it's like to be a product manager or an engineer, kind of at a recommender system, working on the inside of a recommender system. Broadly, the nuance I would add is that we're not just tracking one metric, we're tracking like 20. And also there's like some qualitative user studies that are done. But the typical kind of way that changes get made is like there's someone trains a new model or proposes a new methodology for training a model or adds some feature, and then you do an A/B test, right? So you like test, you have like 0.5% of your users use this new feature, randomly selected. And then you look at the impact on 20 different metrics, one of which is, like cumulative watch time. But of course, that doesn't move very much, especially on especially on smaller changes. But then there's more subtle stuff like, click-through rates, view rates, like how quickly people scroll past it. There's a suite of behavioral metrics that give you kind of a full picture of how users are behaviorally affected by the new feature. Then basically the launch committee, which is some combination of your VP and a bunch of product managers and UX people and engineering managers together kind of make a call. Does this seem net positive or net negative on balance? And sometimes they do. How much can I say about this? let's say sometimes they definitely make calls that are like, this reduces the watch time, but it's clearly better because it reduced the incidence of some toxic content, and they are empowered and willing to make those sorts of trade-offs. The biggest decision like that I can think of is like turning off the news feed, right? Like basically turning off news in your feed, where Facebook was like such a big provider of news for people, and they just turned it off, and that was a huge hit to their engagement. As far as I can tell, unless there's like some Machiavellian whatever thing underneath, that was motivated by like, oh yeah, well, this is actually this is causing harm, and we can't control it, so we're just going to turn it off, and we're going to eat the cost.
Do you remember when was this?
I'm getting some news stories from 2024. Facebook announced its decisions to remove the news tab from its platform in the United States and Australia. Follows a similar deprecation of Facebook News in the United Kingdom. But I feel like the main decision was actually made quite a bit earlier, where it's like your core news feeds basically stopped mixing updates from friends and news. And it just started having updates from friends. And I think that was like I feel like that was several years ago.
At least in the case of Australia, I think it was actually a reaction to Australian regulation. I think it had to do with either revenue sharing or some kind of equal airtime type thing. And so then Facebook chose to just pull news out entirely as a response to that, I think. So they're looking at all these metrics. What would you say is the core metric they're looking at? Is it revenue over a certain amount of time? Because it seems like that would be the thing that they would optimize for, and then watch time kind of gets pulled along as a byproduct. Or what is the key metric that they're looking at?
Yeah, I would say this depends on the recommender system. I know like at Netflix, for example, they look at resubscribe, right? So the metric they're looking for is like, did this feature cause more people to unsubscribe? Obviously, that's like a longer term feature, so they have all sorts of clever kind of leading indicators. Often what you do is you have these like short term metrics, like click-through rate, watch time, etc. Click-through rate, watch time, whatever, scroll-through rates, etc. And then you actually train an additional model that like predicts, okay, based on these metrics, how likely are they, given that we observed over the course of a day of using this feature, people are watching 1% less, how likely are they to unsubscribe at the end of the month or at the end of 3 months, etc. So I'd say like there's usually a top-line business metric like revenue, subscriber count, or a total watch time that you really care about, but you usually don't get very good evidence on it. So you like approximate it using some combination of cheaper, faster metrics and product intuition kind of apply to that.
Any other feedback loops that you guys can imagine? I think, Vidor, you touched on this idea that the more powerful they get, the more they can cause backlash. And so that kind of puts a limiter on things. Any positive feedback loops, any more negative feedback loops?
Yeah, so I was thinking about the question of like how many people are addicted to this stuff. And I suppose like intuitively, I'd love to see hard evidence, but intuitively it seems like, well, civilization's still like functioning, so people can't be like super addicted to this stuff. Like maybe it's a small proportion, but then you kind of look at like people who aren't in work, and the labor force participation rate has been kind of trending downwards since like the late 90s in the US. So then you think, well, there are lots of economically inactive people, the population is aging, at least in the West and some other countries. So like, what are they going to be doing with their time? So I can see like that having an effect. And then a feedback loop which you might see is that as like automation of jobs increases, as these systems get more powerful with like robotics and artificial intelligence, then you'll get more and more people being economically inactive, unless you do believe that it will create just as many jobs as it takes. So I can see that being like a loop where more and more people become economically inactive, and then they don't have anything else to do, and then they get addicted to this stuff.
So there's this reference class of people who have a ton of time. Maybe it's because they're older. Maybe it's because they're unemployed. It seems kind of like the incentives there are to compete for a fixed pool of their resources. If they're already in a situation where they're not going to create many more resources. Is that fair to say? Or is there something that would be, are there incentives that kind of push these people to improve or get back into the workforce? Or do these companies have any incentives to actually increase their earning capacity or anything like that?
It's a fun thing, right? Like if you now sell ads of more expensive products, you could try to make people more productive. I can see how you could have that in theory, but I haven't seen any of that in practice.
Yeah, it's also the incentives don't quite, I think, line up, right? Because it's like if you're Facebook and you're like, you control maybe 20% of someone's like waking hours. I think you're usually better off kind of exploiting them and getting them to buy stuff. Whereas if you make them more productive, A, they'll probably spend less time on Facebook. B, like even if you could then sell them more ads, well, Google, TikTok, etc. are also going to sell them more ads. So it's kind of this like multipolar trap. Maybe if we had one social media monopoly, which I'm not really I think that would be worse for other reasons. But then at least the incentives would be it would be more aligned, because it'd be like Google in some sense just has had for a long time kind of the justified expectation that like it could get $200 per US consumer per year forever. And so in principle, at least, Google had an incentive to like, well, if we increase the whole GDP of the US, we'll just make more money because people will be buying more stuff and searching for more things.
Okay, so but in particular, consider which major to go in. Actually, at some point, I was deciding whether to go to literature or to maths, and having a literature degree is much less economically productive, which means that I would be less willing to spend money on ads that Facebook shows me. So in some sense, Facebook does have like a big stake on which major do you go. Like if you go to college, which major do you go to?
As a class, they have this collective incentive. And so you do see some forms of coordination, like around open source, right? You see they'll contribute to the Linux Foundation. They'll contribute to, I think there's probably like multiple companies that contribute to Docker because this commoditized the complement of cloud compute, right? So they have kind of collaborated or coordinated in some way when it kind of increases the size of the pie for them all.
Yeah, I wish we lived in that world. I feel like it's not inconsistent with economic reality. It does feel like that's just like not how people high up in tech companies think. To me, the big kind of cause area and the thing with recommender systems is less like, oh, I'm worried that they will like destroy our minds, although I think that it is a possible risk. It's more the incredible waste of potential, where I'm just like, yeah, billions of billions of hours of human time will be allocated today, mostly guided by like clickbait incentives, mostly to just like entertain them, and not even in a particularly like joyful way, but almost like help people dissociate better. You have such an opportunity. Like I'm sure there's a video on YouTube right now that if I watched, I would feel like incredibly inspired, and I would like call my dad and have a really good conversation with him, or go outside and like talk to a stranger and like start a relationship. Or Google can probably introduce me to like a good friend or a co-founder or my future life partner or anything like that. They have the data. They're not using it that way. They're instead just like, I don't know, getting optimizing for getting a few more cents of advertising revenue. And that just seems like a colossal civilizational level failure.
And the better that video does, the more it will be perceived by the algorithm is causing an immediate drop off in watch time. That it like people watch that video and then they go do something else.
Oh,
Yep, exactly.
Ouch.
Yeah, I've thought about that sometimes when I'm scrolling. Sometimes I don't have Instagram anymore, but when I used to have Instagram, and sometimes on Twitter, I will scroll past a tweet or post that says something that inspires me to go outside or do something else. And I know that a bunch of other people will be inspired by that as well. And I'm like, man, I can't imagine. I'm so lucky that I got to see this thing. I can't imagine this thing medically surviving in the incentives of the Meta or X algorithm, right? This thing is very unfit. I was very happy to see it, but it's very unfit.
Yeah, there's maybe a darker version of that, which there's a big panic. I think it was in 2018, 2009. I shouldn't say big panic. A few academics wrote papers about it, and like it was big in the tech news of like recommender systems that shape you to want to use more recommender systems. So kind of in a similar effect, but applied to like your own kind of patterns, right? Where this is one frame of what happens with addiction, right? It's like an appetite that self reinforces. So similarly, you can imagine it's like the part of you that wants to go outside just like never gets any reward, because if the algorithm ever gives it reward, then you go outside and they lose your user minutes. And instead, the parts of you that like want to stay at home get amplified, including like even like. And this could happen at a very deep mimetic level, right? Because these are powerful deep learning systems that like have tons of data and understand things about human psychology and the collective imagination that we don't even understand yet. And so they might be differentially spreading, I don't know, patterns of thought like it's not safe to go outside because I don't know, like crime is high or something, or like just do not even tell you crime is high, but just give you enough stories of people being murdered or assaulted outside, such that you would like that is a very fit meme, not just because it's triggering, but because over long periods of time reinforces that you should stay at home and not go outside. Again, no one has evidence that this is happening, but it seems plausible and the incentives are all there. And it seems like the algorithms in principle, especially kind of in 2018, most of these algorithms were pretty short term, like you were just trying to predict like clicks or watch time. Now, I think a lot more algorithms are doing kind of long horizon reinforcement learning. And we've just gotten better at that. So in principle, these algorithms could have learned patterns like, oh yeah, if we show this person like a violent news story, like a month later, they will be more likely to have higher watch time because they're just scared.
Oh, wow. I didn't know that it was operating at that time scale.
I think, I honestly don't know. I think in some sense, like no one quite knows because some of these feedback loops operate through people. Yeah, I guess I'm not confident that they're operating at that time scale, but I think at least the institution is operating at that time scale, right? And the algorithms are probably operating at a shorter time scale, but maybe there's still things that help increase watch time tomorrow might also help increase watch time in a week or a month. Yeah.
I was thinking about this at the civilization level. So if you have the EU, China, and Europe blocks, if one of the blocks is able to better deal with this, and one of the other blocks kind of gets consumed by the internet equivalent of crack cocaine, you could see a feedback loop there where the US falls, but the next iteration doesn't. This is unclear. Like I think maybe over the decades, this could be a factor. If this is a big deal, populations like the Amish, who just are stuck in the past, or populations that otherwise have some like healthy amount of tech skepticism, might get selected for. You also have smaller countries. You have Armenia versus Azerbaijan, and Philippines versus Cambodia. So maybe there's some sense in which this changes military power, which changes populations. But it's not a super fast feedback loop.
I think that feedback loop also depends on the extent to which your broad human capital matters. And there are worlds where, because of AI automation, maybe a much smaller subset of your human capital is way more concentrated among fewer people. And it's important for them not to get captured by these algorithms, but it doesn't matter as much for the populace. So yeah, there's futures where like there's still relatively broad distribution of human capital, in which case, yeah, you don't want your entire populace succumbing to this. But then there's also futures where they didn't have much human capital to begin with.
Yeah, my intuition is we're sort of eating our we're eating our seed corn here to a substantial extent. Where this is most obvious with like iPad babies or something. Like clearly iPad. I don't know. I can't imagine that iPad babies are like developing at the same pace that like kids would be if they were like playing outside or even playing Minecraft. Again, I don't think it's all about screens. It's like there are video games that can incredibly accelerate child development in various ways, and I think I'm the lucky recipient of like a much more I want to say like developmentally wise video game backdrop when I was growing up in the 90s, early 2000s.
Yeah, did someone curate your video game library? Why?
No, I just feel like, well, part of it is just like, yeah, I was choosing video games. I was playing a lot of MMOs, so that had like the social element. That's why I learned how to write and argue, is like by arguing with people on my video game forums. So partly luck, partly I think like kids naturally sort of seek out developmentally valuable activities if given the option. And in that sense, a lot of this like anti-screen stuff, I think, can almost lead to the opposite effect, where it's just like if you problematize screens, then kids will just like, if you just give your kid access to a screen for like 20 minutes a day, they're just gonna like do the iPad. They're just gonna try to get as much dopamine as possible. Whereas if you give kids unlimited access to screens, like I had at some points in my life, you might have, like, they just get bored at some point and they're like, okay, what else can I do? And I have a keyboard and I can like do stuff. I don't know. I'm not sure. I
Yeah.
think someone really needs to think through how to do like Montessori with the internet, essentially, where it's like create an environment where at every point the kid has like taking the tool seriously and also learns to like developing their skills and increasing their ability. I think that's happening to a lot of kids, but I'm not sure if that's randomly or due to like some kind of parental supervision, or it's, I don't know, some personality characteristics or whatever. But there's definitely like great ways to use screens for development.
What do you guys think about the anecdotes about cognitive atrophy because of LLMs? Is this something that's being selected for, that it's actually in their interest to cause cognitive atrophy? Or is this something that we're just seeing right now because it's relatively nascent and this will eventually go away? Do you buy the anecdotes? Do you think they're pointing to something that's happening real? And to the extent that they are, why do you think this is happening? Do you think it's durable?
So what were you pointing at with the words LLM atrophy?
Cognitive atrophy. So
So for
people
like
being
college
unable.
students or for like programmers?
Yeah,
Or for
so
what?
college students is a great example. Stories from professors about not being able to assign reading of lengths that they could easily assign in the past. People not being willing to read anything without a summary, and stuff like that.
Yeah, I don't think I have strong intuitions or data here. I mean, it seems obvious, kind of that a lot of schools are like, there's a bunch of like make work type stuff, right? Where it's just like, it's not interesting to the students and not interesting to the professors, but it's sort of a pattern that if you follow it, you might learn something or not. And yeah, if you give people a shortcut, they just like won't do the thing. So in that sense, I'm like, yeah, well, that's just like the school should adapt to have better exercises, or you have to like go back to paper assignments. There's all sorts of ways. Like if the goal is not to actually produce an essay, but to like learn to think and learn to attend, then we should explicitly teach the like attention skill, and we should explicitly create environments where it's like, no, you actually have to focus for 2 hours, otherwise you fail. There's a question of like, well, but that's not what the modern economy looks like. So why do we need that exactly? But yeah, I think like human capital, I do expect us to lose a lot of human capital as a result of this. Maybe the techno optimist in me is like, sure, but we'll gain like different forms of human capital that are more complementary with, like, it's like, yeah, it is just like not that useful to, just like it's not that useful to do mental math anymore. It might just be not that useful to like write essays anymore. We should be using our monkey brains for something else. And maybe we get to be more embodied now. Maybe we don't have to sit at desks all day, reading marks on the screen and then outputting marks on the screen, which is not something we were ever that good at in like biological evolution. That's not what evolution optimizes for. Maybe we get to go back out and use our hands and use our fingers and use our senses in a more fine way. We sort of become the LLM sensors and actuators, and the LLMs can do the like cognitive work that we've had to like weirdly force ourselves to do.
Yeah, I think Tyler Cowen points at this kind of natural complement argument by talking about how he says it's undeniable that the kids now are better and more impressive than ever because some of them use these tools in a complementary fashion to move faster than you otherwise could, but it's causing a lot of problems, especially in the middle of the pack for kids, that they're getting worse on various metrics. So yeah, maybe this comes down to kind of a distinction between how it helps the median person in aggregate, how it helps or affects the like exceptional person.
Yeah, and there's a question of democratization of like, there are specific technologies, there are specific products you could build that help the median person. Kind of scaffolds them on the same work that was done in the past by like really good teachers and textbook writers and stuff like that, and we just need to do that work again.
iPad babies seem solved, right? Like if you want to keep a baby glued to a screen, this is solved. This is my sense.
Solved is an interesting word there, but yes, iPad babies are solved.
Yeah. If you look at the percentage of a population which is addicted to various things, are we actually plateauing or is there more of an exponential part that we will continue seeing? She was saying this thing that the number of hours uh, has plateaued because people have to eat and work. But I do see some variability within friends around how much they're glued to screen and how much they're really addicted.
Yeah, I feel like this is actually a really big open question of how do you extrapolate from canaries in the coal mine, psychologically speaking? Because we have so many data points now. We have, iPad babies, as you're saying, that's one thing. We can also look at LLM-driven psychosis, right? We've got a few people that this is happening to as a percentage of the population, but this could happen to more.
I've got friends of friends who are just have an addiction to YouTube, like straightforwardly just spending many hours on it.
We've also got examples of people dying playing video games. So obviously these are outliers on various traits, and there were details about the video games, like they were social, that allowed them to continue pushing for a long amount of time. But this general question of, well, what is the curve? What is the trend? Like, how do we actually extrapolate from these things seems pretty impactful, because this is some kind of like distribution where you can see a smooth increase in people who are vulnerable, or is it something where suddenly there's a discontinuity, the underlying algorithm gets 10% better, and now suddenly 60% of the population is vulnerable in a way that they weren't before that 10% improvement?
It doesn't seem to me like this stuff has viral dynamics, which you'd expect, which would be like the worst case, right? Is like exponential growth. It's like one person gets infected and then they like infect a bunch of others. Yeah, it seems more like it just kind of like is a threshold of how bad your life has to be before you before you're like vulnerable to addiction. And that could be addiction to gambling or heroin or these like digital technologies. I guess the problem with digital technologies is really hard to exit.
There was someone on Twitter recently, someone like put him forward as like the first example of a useful person who is taken under by LLM psychosis or something. Maybe he's a VC or something like that. But I think he had like 50K Twitter followers, and that doesn't seem like someone whose
and 2
life
billion
is...
on the management.
Oh, really? Okay. Oh,
Yeah,
okay. So was he a VC?
No, he was a hedge fund manager.
Hedge fund manager. Okay, yeah. So, yeah, I mean, he could be super depressed. I don't know. But, he doesn't seem like the archetype of someone who is in their mom's basement. They have nothing going on for them, and so are really, really susceptible to these things. That seems like someone with a lot of resources, a lot of social capital, and he got taken under by, by this kind of like root store pattern or something.
Yeah, I guess maybe the question is, how quickly antibodies grow. But yeah, my suspicion, but I think you're right. Like probably won't grow, or probably won't grow quickly enough. I at least have like started treating LLMs with a lot of suspicion, especially if they're doing the psychophantic thing. I actually had a really funny anecdote. A friend of mine is like former ML researcher, now like a body worker, kind of like massage therapist. And I showed her one, like a chatbot that I built once that was just like a layer on top of Claude. It was just like, oh yeah, hi, like how are you doing today? And she just like did a double take. She was like, wait, why is this thing talking to me like it knows me? Like, I don't know it. Like, where is it running? Where are its servers? Like, what's going on? And I thought that's an incredibly healthy reaction to have that I've also never had. It's like, weirdly, we're used to, maybe because I'm used to playing video games, I'm used to being like, oh yeah, sure, it's talking to me like it's my friend and personal secretary. I'll just pretend to be its boss, like, and we'll just talk as if we know each other. And she was like, wait, no, like, I need to understand you as an entity before I can form a relationship with you. And like, whose servers are you running on? Who controls you? What, like, did I trust them? I think these are questions that, sorry, I guess this is less forecasting and more just like guidance, but I just found that a very healthy reaction to all sorts of technologies, including language models, where it's just like, treat them like you're treating people. Don't play the game that they want you to play. And I feel like that's a healthier attitude going forward. But clearly, even that reaction didn't even occur to me. So clearly, I'm like vulnerable. I'm probably vulnerable to a sufficiently advanced psychophantic agent.
We've spoken a lot about recommender systems that are serving us mainly things to consume, entertainment or media, but then there's also the recommender systems that mediate our sense making. So especially X is the biggest example of this. What are you thinking about when it comes to how recommender systems kind of interfere with this process, make this process better? Yeah, what are your thoughts there?
Yeah, it is weird to think about a place like X, which is simultaneously a news app, an entertainment app, and also like a group kind of something like a bunch of group chats between people, like depending on which part of the community you're in, or which part of the sort of social graph you're in. I do think Twitter is an incredible source of sense making, and like a rapid alert system. I think back to the pandemic, where it's like I got a bunch of the reason I was on top of the pandemic earlier than basically anyone else in my social circle is because I followed a bunch of people on X, and that the news spread incredibly quickly, and early and accurate information about masks, accurate information about vaccines, accurate information about all sorts of things spread there. My sense is like the sense making aspect of X has gotten worse recently, and I think a lot of people feel that way. But a lot of that is conflated by who you follow. So it's like, yeah, maybe this is one of the hardest parts about recommender systems and feeds is that because everyone has their own optimized personal feed, you never get common knowledge about who has read what, and this is a real problem for sense making. Like for a community to be able to make sense together, you kind of need to have a shared canon. You need to have like some sense of like, oh, we've all read these 100 things and we all are on the same page, at least. Maybe not that we agree, but at least that we know and we can reference them. So I think there's a weird way in which like information spreads more rapidly than ever, but not in the way that our human social brains can really understand or interface with. Like, I'm not sure we know what it's like. We don't really understand what it's like to see a tweet and intuit that like maybe some people saw it and maybe some people didn't. And I'm sure you had the experience of like referencing something in a group of friends, and then turns out everyone saw that same tweet, and you're just like, wow, okay, we're actually surprisingly on the same page, but we would have never known that, or vice versa.
On the other hand, you do have proxies of that, namely the views and likes and retweets. So you can't draw perfect inference, but you can draw some inference.
No, you definitely get some information. And in general, recommender systems or social media like Twitter is an incredible accelerator of like spread sense making and information spread. I feel like, but there's just like a lot of scope to make it better. And I wish that we weren't trapped in these like social media platforms with strong network effects, such that there could be very little innovation. Like, I'd love there to be 100 little versions of Twitter that we use for different situations. Like, I want like a group of 10 friends. I like you guys as a group of super forecasters should like have your own Twitter essentially, right? Where you sort of like you're able to shape the algorithm and the way the conversation goes towards the kind of conversations that you think are most productive for predicting the future. And I think that's like an incredible, you'd be very good at that. And that would be a very valuable conversation to have. It can't really happen because we're like all subject to the Twitter algorithm. It sort of can happen, right? You can hack around with it. The like community known as Teapot, I would say, is kind of like a communal hack of the Twitter algorithm to make a local sense-making community, like a local Twitter that's exceptionally earnest and high signal relative to default Twitter. And I think that emerged basically organically by like a few prominent people circulating norms, and then like kind of a bunch of social norms forming. Always like before replying, for example, is like a very obvious kind of engagement. Generally speaking, when I post on Less Wrong, I get incredibly high quality feedback on my ideas, and people will actually read. People will bother to read the whole structure of my argument and like respond directly to the weakest point of the argument. And I'm just like, that's incredible that exists, and I wish there was 100 more of these. The main thing that I think is causing the lack of diversity in the sense making and preventing progress is just the crushing network effect of like, you have to be on the platform where everyone else is, and the platform where everyone else is probably going to be either already optimizing for engagement, or someone will buy it and then start optimizing it for engagement, and that will kind of at the margin outcompete all the other possible metrics.
We have some good thoughts. Anything you want to riff on?
I guess, yeah, it kind of more on the LLM psychosis side of just like, how vulnerable are human minds exactly? That's something I don't really have a good understanding of. Like, are there 5-second clips that you could show me and turn me into like a zombie? Or are there 5-second clips you could show me that like will reliably trigger a like experience of like oneness with God and will like heal all my trauma? Is that possible? Is that possible? Are there such information packets?
Yeah, like what have we already seen that would lend evidence to yes or no? Like, I imagine on the like on the yes side are things like anecdotes about hypnosis. Hypnosis seems kind of like a cognitive hack, right? Trying to get at some part of the brain where, to use like a operating system terminology, you kind of manage to get your privileges escalated so that you can change something very quickly. This sounds dangerous, but can also be beneficial, and people are doing hypnosis in the hopes that it's like a beneficial kind of hack. Then maybe on the other side, you've got, I don't know much about neuroscience or neurology, but maybe there's something about the connectedness of the brain that kind of limits the right access of some of the external sensory, like our sensory sphere, and like how quickly it can overwrite certain deeper things.
Yeah, I think I was talking about this with near Sayan, and they were like, it's not we're probably just have a limited learning rate based on our sensory data, unless you're like on drugs, or some other some other like chemical process. So it's just like you just need a certain amount of time to pass, or like maybe even a certain amount of sleep cycles to pass in order to rewire your brain in some dramatic way. But I agree with you. I think hypnosis is kind of the more interesting and relevant thing here, where it's just like I'm confused about this. Like, if hypnosis exists, I would have predicted naively, in a world where hypnosis exists, we kind of like build our whole social infrastructure on hypnosis because it's just way too powerful to not. But it seems like, no, it's just like things that we do things that kind of hypnosis is sort of like something we do at parties or in like magic shows, and maybe inside like therapeutic containers. But even then, we don't like talk about it as hypnosis.
Or people automatically learn to modulate their voice and stance, so that by the time you have somebody like Steve Jobs, it's not that they're like charismatic. It's like they've hacked the way they present ideas is particularly suggestive because they've iterated on some of those loops, or like a bunch of the best speeches or the Trump rallies do have a hypnotic effect, or comedian shows, like a bunch of the late night shows have a hypnotic nature because they have this repeated structure of presenting an idea, making fun of the enemy, laughing, and if you repeat that for like an hour, that can be fairly powerful.
I can imagine like short form video probably it would
Yeah.
you could frame it as a form of hypnosis, and it probably, like, popular videos do have a like particular structure that you could analyze in those terms. I guess I'd love to see that. I'd love to see like an advanced meditator, hypnosis practitioner deconstruct that, so we kind of have we can develop sort of antibodies to it.
There does seem to be an incentive for a recommender system to find these patterns. There doesn't seem to be an incentive for them to find a pattern that would render you useless, because then you're not going to be watching or clicking on anything. If that is discovered, it sounds like something that would be kind of discovered by the algorithm and then quickly selected against. But like the hypnotic things that cause you to be a more lucrative consumer for the platform, I could buy that being within the set of things that is rewarded.
Okay, counterpoint. I
Yeah.
do see people rehabilitated by TikTok.
Mhm.
Just glued to screens. Some close in real life. And I could see that the incentive there is that ad purchases have been trained to pay for views. But then the views will be for any kind of consumer, not or for views or for clicks. So you get paid per views, and then if you click, you get paid a bit more. But the feedback loop for the ad industry is quite slow. So in the meantime, you can have Google and Facebook and TikTok capture some of those rents for some ad spending that is ineffective.
Sorry, I didn't understand. What is so this? What is the difference in the feedback loop with the advertisers, and then what is the rent that the
In some sense, what these platforms are optimizing for is allocating share of spending. However, they're not doing that directly. What they're selling is ad views. But then if you inhabilitate somebody so that they're staring at content, including ads for hours, they're not necessarily making any purchasing decisions. But on the short term, the algorithms can fall to really favoring that dissociated state. You could imagine a global optimum for these algorithms where you have you hit them with DoorDash, which means that they have more money, but then you also hit them with like math academies so that and coding stuff so that they're more productive employees, and you like move them from the like unemployed arts graduate dissociating to the engineer addicted to DoorDash, so that they earn and consume more money. But you don't have to. But algorithms don't necessarily have to be able to take that step, so they can just be stuck on the just dissociate people, make people dissociate so that they hit with more ads.
I guess that seems like a great description of what's happening. It's like it's not actually in anyone's benefit to have a bunch of dissociated people, unless it is the fact that unless it's like they're actually being put in a suggestible state in which they'll buy more consumer products, which I think is plausible. I posted about this yesterday. Is like, it seems like income sharing agreements are actually like a key piece of like the solution potentially here, where if you could the problem is that the algorithm has no incentive to make me like a more productive, like economically valuable person. But in principle, you could imagine assigning like 1% of my lifetime income to the YouTube algorithm, and then the YouTube algorithm is like optimizing.
You're already doing that. Like Americans are already. No, I think the incentive does exist, but I think the platforms are being too myopic, so they're stuck in this local maximum by their own lights.
Well, I think the incentive is weakened by the fact that it's not contractual. YouTube has to outcompete TikTok in the short term, right? So it's like YouTube not only has to, sure, YouTube has maybe YouTube has a diffuse incentive to make me better off, but I won't even get to watch that video if it shows me a math video and TikTok shows me like a cute cat, I'll just swipe over to TikTok and watch the cute at.
It feels that there is an opportunity here for Facebook, for Instagram or YouTube, which have been around for like, over a decade at this point, right? To make you take better career decisions.
I agree. I'm confused by this. Like, I think that these incentives do exist. There's obviously like at some fundamental level, I just can't believe that you can make more money by fooling people than by giving people what they really want, or at least what they really want projected on the axis of capitalism. At some level, I'm still confused about this. Like, surely this isn't the like it seems like the society is behaving as if that's the optimal, but surely we're just wasting a ton of value, and someone needs to like set up the market or reduce transaction costs so that we can sign the right contract so that we get out of this local equilibrium.
Yeah, this is really interesting. I'm also thinking about interest rates, and the lower interest rates are, the more it matter, like the more the long-term potential of someone matters. The higher interest rates are, the more you just care about what they have right now and trying to compete for that.
Well, no, interest rates over dollars. But which is interesting because people care about the stock price in terms of dollars rather than in terms of, the share, their ability to buy houses, for example, or like their ability to influence on the world.
I don't think that's necessarily the case. Like, when I buy stocks, I'm not hoping that I may one day redeem them for dollars, but I'm not necessarily going to redeem them for dollars. I'm buying, some share of the intellectual property and the capital, and then I may redeem them for something else later.
What I mean is that you completely right on discount rates, but they don't necessarily have to align with what the inflation rate is. So you could imagine somebody caring about things further in the future, but being in a very inflationary period. That might still lead you to invest in in people's development. Like if you're Facebook, you might say something like the dollar is being inflated, but we do care about American, about people in 10, 20 years. So we're gonna take these steps that are somewhat costly in the short term.
So that actually brings me to this question. In your 2019 post, you wrote, in addition, because of the massive economic and social benefits of increasing recommender system alignment, it's reasonable to expect a snowball effect of increased funding and research interest after the first successes. Do you still agree with this? Would you change anything about this?
Yeah, I'm really annoyed, I guess, that this didn't happen. Like I tried to work on this at Google Research a bit, these like conversational recommender systems, because one of the things language models, like when I was writing this is before language models were really successful, and so a lot of the problem was just like, can we even like get to understand people's values deeply enough, right? Like it's like a common question I would get is like, okay, sure, we're optimizing for engagement, and we know that's bad, but like, how are we supposed to like look into the user's soul and understand what they really want? I'm like, we totally could do that. We can like interview them with language models. Language model could be like, what do you care about? Like, what do you remember? What was like the happiest moment of your last month? Like, how could we make that happen more often? It could just do that. It could just figure that out. So in that sense, the technology is more than here, and yet like no one has built a recommender system that does anything like this, as far as I can tell. Like why doesn't Instagram or Twitter or any of these systems, or why hasn't a new recommender system popped up that does this? Instead, it seems like the infinite scrolling feed is more dominant than ever. Part of me is like, yeah, maybe I believed in the efficient market hypothesis more back then, and now I'm like, no, like technology just like follows these like random trends, and mostly people just do whatever seems like everyone else is doing. Maybe like if literally I don't build the aligned recommender system, no one will. um I don't know. I'm like, at least I've updated more towards that view than
Seems
I
like a
had in
good startup
2018.
idea. Like we will. Yeah, seems like a good startup idea.
Well, you heard it here first. If you want to do this startup, definitely get in touch with me. I will. I could probably connect you with funding and with good engineers and researchers and all sorts of help.
Can we add some, because you've thought about this, can we add some more meat to the bones to how you imagine like an aligned recommender system to work a bit more? Like what are the signals? What are the steps given the technology we currently have?
Yeah, I imagine like one interface I imagine is just like, so you log in and then you open this app and it asks you like a pretty broad question, almost like a therapist would, of just
Mm-hmm.
like, yeah, how are you feeling? Like,
Mm-hmm.
what's up? What's going on? And you will like have a conversation with it that in which you articulate something that's gone wrong, or something that some desire that you have, some wish you have for the world, or for yourself or for your life. And then it like offers you a piece of content that like seems to that could help with that, whether it's like read a book or just like watch this video or here's like a tweet for you or whatever else. I can imagine kind of a more content-based version of this. I can also imagine a more social forward version of this where it's more like a bunch of people do this simultaneously, or like kind of asynchronously. This is kind of a daily habit for a bunch of people, and then it like connects you to other people's thoughts. I think Davey Morris of Plexus.earth had this really cool recommender system where it's like your interface to it was you record a 30-second audio clip of like just what's going on for you, and it would match you with people who had a similar thought.
Mm-hmm.
And then some like that started a few like a handful of conversations and discussions and stuff like that.
What does the monetization structure for something like this look like? Because it's not responding to a short-term purchase signal, but something that has to be more aligned with a user's extrapolated volition.
I think that is the crux, as we've discussed. Yeah, kind of the incentives problem. I think one thing that gives me hope is like we're no longer in the era of like software is free. It's almost like because we now have intelligence that's cheap enough, paradoxically, now we're willing to pay for software. It's like, I think it's more reasonable to charge people for a subscription now because you actually will like provide measurable value to their life. So paying $10 or $20 a month for a social media service that like actually helps you live according to your goals is much less of a crazy proposition, I think, that it was 10 years ago. Subscription has their own problems. Like ideally, I almost want this to feel like to be more like a utility, where it's like you could just turn the dial and like add more intelligence and like based on how much you're willing to pay that day, you can basically pay more for more compute to solve your personal problems and the problems of your community. And that just feels like a more aligned incentive, because then you're directly, and then the company, the aligned recommender systems company, like takes a margin on top of that. So that's kind of the dream incentive, or maybe the dream incentive is more like this income sharing agreement where it's like deeply incentivized to actually make you a better person. But I think as a starting point, the utility, like paper use of intelligence model or the subscription model is pretty good. But like part of me is like, nothing has ever worked at scale without advertising or something. I mean, ChatGPT is an exception. Midjourney, which I'm part of, is an exception. So there are some very, very big, I think, aligned recommender systems companies that could be built purely on a subscription model. But maybe you do have to figure out some way of doing advertising. But again, like, advertising is not, like, at some level, advertising is just information. And if I'm sharing what I really need, and it happens that there's a product that works for that, and someone is willing to pay sort of for the compute for me to find that thing. Yeah, the tricky thing, I guess, is creating the right platform incentives such that the platform isn't optimized to like fool me into buying something I don't want.
Even if the platform's not optimized to do that, you're still going to have like the equivalent of an SEO arms race where if this thing actually gets broad adoption, now you've got a whole industry trying to make sure that these agents that are taking into account people's desires, what they believe is the best product to use is your product, which like could be the case because of the incentives because of a good advertising transaction, but it could also be like, a more nefarious kind of
Right. At some level, I want to say like SEO is just life. I don't know. Like when I'm hanging out with a friend, I'm like using a bunch of compute to try to like get them to like me and try to create a good experience for them. And like, yeah, like the aligned recommender system platform is not this like puritanical, like we're only here for like the great benefit of humanity. Like there's going to be part of what it means to be aligned with me is to be aligned with all sorts of motivations that I have. And it should serve those motivations and basically find win-win deals between people.
Thanks, Ivan, for coming on. Is there anything you want to plug, your socials or anything you're working on? Where can people find you?
Yeah, people can find me on Twitter at Ivan Vendrov, and my Substack, nothinghuman.substack.com. Yeah, always, my inboxes are always open. Always happy to discuss these ideas more. Yeah, thanks for having me on the podcast.
There's this phrase, nothing human makes it out alive of the near future.
It's a reference to, two things. One is kind of my life motto, which is nothing human is alien to me, by the Roman playwright Terence, which is kind of like my desire to, like, I don't know, experience everything that it means to be human and like relate to every human experience, no matter how weird or alien or disturbing. And then, it also happens to be the beginning of that line. Yeah, nothing human makes it out of the near future, which I think is one of the maybe emotions that I feel like is underrepresented in the current discourse about AI is something like grief. Like what it means to be human and what it means to be a human society is just like fundamentally changing, and a lot of it just won't come back. And I do feel like even as we there's like fears that we have, and there's also, we can celebrate all the beautiful things that we'll build, but there's also just like a grief, like something is dying, it's in its death throes. And I feel like that Nick Land quote really hits.